Please say that. Thank you.
Mr. Hakim, you are accompanied by your counsel. For the record, will you introduce them?
Mr. Richard Janis and Mr. Larry Wexler, further left.
Mr. Kim, at an earlier phase of our investigation, after it appeared that you would assert your constitutional privilege against self-incrimination, the Senate and the House Select Committees obtained orders of the United States District Court. The orders provide in substance that you may not refuse to testify on the basis of your privilege against self-incrimination. The immunity orders have been communicated to you previously, and you have already given testimony to our committee pursuant to them. Your testimony today will also be under those continuing grants of immunity. The previously communicated immunity orders are available at the witness table, and copies will be placed in the record of these hearings. Without objection, so ordered. Any statement? Who will be on first? Chair recognizes John Niels.
Chairman, I've been informed that the witness has a brief opening statement that he wishes to make.
Mr. Hakim, please proceed, sir.
Was he sworn?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be able to appear before you today to discuss my role in the matters under investigation. Like you, I'm anxious that the full story of this affair can be disclosed to the Congress and to the American people so that everyone can judge for himself what has taken place and can consider the important issues raised by these hearings. I'm also hopeful that the committee's questions will lead to a full revelation of my own involvement in this affair. Over the last 6 months, my family and I have had to withstand public attention and accusations difficult for anyone to bear. I have been variously described as everything from a mastermind to a shadowy figure. My reputation has been assaulted, and I have even been referred to in thinly veiled ethnic slurs. As will become clear during my testimony, my participation in this matter was a result of a variety of motives. Not only was I presented with an opportunity to help my country, the United States, and my native land, Iran, but at the same time, I had the opportunity to profit financially. As a businessman, I never pretended to undertake the tasks I was asked to perform for philanthropic purposes, and I made that clear to all of those with whom I was involved, including General Secord, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the CIA, and the Iranians. At the same time, I never would have gotten involved in these efforts if I had thought them illegal or contrary to the policies of the United States government. When I first was asked by General Secord to assist with the Contra effort, I understood that he had obtained legal advice from a prestigious Washington law firm confirming the legality of our activities. I was also aware that General Secord himself had substantial experience in the U.S. government, including experience dealing with the laws regarding sale of weapons. Since I trusted and still trust General Secord implicitly, I was confident when he gave me his own assurance regarding the legality of our activities. Finally, I was told that our Contra activities were being undertaken not only with approval by, but at the request of the President of the United States. We were dealing directly with the White House staff. Consequently, it never occurred to me as a private citizen independently to investigate the legality of the President's policy. With respect to Iran initiative, the same basic facts are also true. I intended to profit from my activities, and I never made any pretense about that fact. Moreover, I had the same assurances regarding the legality of our efforts, and I was told that the President of the United States had personally signed an order authorizing our activities. During the course of our efforts, I had frequent dealings with government officials in the CIA, the DEA, and the President's National Security Council. I received substantial official support for my activities, and I attended numerous meetings with these officials, including a number of meetings at the White House. Under those circumstances, I had no reason to believe that my activities could have been in any way improper or contrary to U.S. policy. The Iran initiative also afforded me a unique opportunity to combine financial self-interest with the pursuit of a personal and political interest of great importance to me. I was born, raised, and formerly operated substantial businesses in Iran. I'm attached to that land and its people. I hoped and understood that one of the purposes of our efforts was to establish relationships that ultimately could lead to an end to the terrible toll in human bloodshed being suffered by the people of Iran and Iraq. I also hoped and understood that our efforts would assist the United States government to obtain the release of American hostages and, more important in the long term, to enable the United States to reestablish normal relations with a country whose geopolitical importance is undisputable. As a private businessman and as a naturalized American citizen devoted to this country, I considered it an honor to be called upon by the office of the President of the United States to render meaningful assistance to my country. I'm now prepared to answer your questions and assure you that I will do my best to answer them candidly. There may be times when you will have to be patient with me, however, for although I believe that I speak English well, it is not my native language, as I believe your staff came to understand during 5 long days of deposition. This can occasionally result in miscommunications or misunderstandings, but such miscommunications and misunderstandings, once identified, will be clarified. Thank you.
Mr. Niels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hakim, I take it you are an Iranian-born businessman.
That's correct, Mr. Niels.
And you are just over 50 years old.
That's correct.
And I take it that you lived in Tehran and were raised there until you were approximately 20 years old.
That's also correct.
And at that time you came to this country for education and spent 1 year at high school in San Luis Obispo.
That's correct.
And then you spent 3 years at California State Polytechnic College.
Approximately.
As it was then called.
That's correct.
And for financial reasons, you were then forced to return to Iran.
Yes, that was during Dr. Amini's work, yes.
I think it would be a good idea if you moved the microphone about 6 inches further towards you.
Is this better now?
That's much better. Thank you, Mr. Hakim. And that was in approximately 1959.
That is correct.
And soon thereafter, you went into business in Iran.
That is also correct.
And you were associated with a company called Multicorp.
That is correct.
I should have mentioned first a company called Telecom.
For the first 9 years, that's right.
That was Telecom.
Telecom Limited, yes.
And Telecom was in the business of marketing the products of U.S. manufacturers of electronic equipment to the government of Iran.
That is correct. That's what they did then.
And then you started your own company called Multicorp.
That's right.
And that was in approximately 1972.
That's also correct.
And Multicorp was in roughly the same business as Telecom.
Roughly.
And I take it Multicorp was quite successful and grew to have approximately 150 employees.
At one point, we had 150 employees. That's correct.
Sometime in the mid-1970s, you acquired a second residence in France, just outside of Geneva, Switzerland.
That's also correct.
And you started businesses in your second home.
Well, expanded basically the same business that I had in Multicorp out of there. You're correct.
You started a company called Stanford Technology S.A.
That was one of the companies I established there in Geneva.
And it had a subsidiary, Stanford Technology USA, in California.
That's also correct.
And the California company was engaged in the business of selling communication systems equipment to the government of Iran.
And also manufacturing.
And I take it there came a time in approximately 1978 when, for personal reasons, you moved your principal residence to California.
Yes, I moved from Europe to California.
And your father and sisters already lived there, and I take it was for personal reasons that you moved.
That is correct, Mr. Niels.
And shortly thereafter, the revolution occurred in Iran.
That is also right.
And essentially terminated much of your business activities, including all of your business activities in Iran.
That's also correct.
However, I take it as of that time you had acquired substantial personal assets as a result of the earnings of Multicorp and your other businesses.
You're right.
And during the next 5 years or so, you also received some benefit from the sale of a subsidiary of Stanford Technology USA.
That's correct.
But other than that, I take it after the revolution, your business activities, other than this one sale of the subsidiary, were losing propositions.
You're very correct.
I take it that you continue to live in California today.
You're right.
You know, I take it, a man named General Secord.
Yes, sir.
And you met him first in Iran in the 1970s.
That's correct, sir.
And I take it from what you've told us in deposition testimony prior to today that Mr. General Secord was instrumental in your losing a very lucrative contract with the Iranian Air Force.
That's also correct.
And I take it you also had dealings with General Secord in connection with the hostages, the U.S. Embassy hostages in Iran.
Initially with him and later on with a different segment of the U.S. government.
Would you very briefly describe the events in connection with these hostages that caused you to come into contact with General Secord?
This was prior to my becoming an American citizen. I was honored only in 1984 to become an American citizen. General Secord, knowing that I had substantial contacts in Iran and to that date I still maintained Multicorp, he called me to meet with him in his office in the Pentagon and very openly asked me if I was going to be ready to help out with the release of American hostages in Tehran, and I offered to help out. And from there on, I believe it was the Air Force intelligence people who continued their contact with me.
I take it you kept in contact with General Secord from time to time throughout the early 1980s.
You're right, sir.
And that was during the period when General Secord was employed by the U.S. government.
That's correct.
And I take it that one of the reasons was that you knew that General Secord had good contacts in Saudi Arabia, and you thought if he ever left the government, you and he might be able to make some money together.
That's right. General Secord enjoys a lot of respect in Saudi Arabia, amongst other Arab countries.
And when you found out sometime in 1983 that General Secord had left the U.S. government, I take it you approached him and asked him to become your business partner.
Effectively, yes. Effectively, you're right.
And you set up a company called Stanford Technology Trading Group International, which we will call STTGI, in which you and General Secord each had a 50% share.
The company was already established maybe a month or so earlier, and it was not active, but your conclusion is correct, Mr. Leach. We became 50-50 partners.
And it thereafter maintained offices in Vienna, Virginia, near where General Secord lives.
That's correct.
And I take it the business of STTGI was and was intended to be the marketing of products of U.S. manufacturing companies overseas, and principally to foreign governments.
That was the focus.
I take it you know a man named Willard Zucker.
Yes, I do, sir.
And he lives in Geneva?
Yes, he does.
Switzerland?
That's correct.
And he owns a company, or so far as you're aware, he owns a company known as CSF.
That's correct.
And that's a Swiss fiduciary company.
That's also correct.
And I take it a Swiss fiduciary company is a company which provides a number of services which would include opening bank accounts in Switzerland for its clients.
That's one of the functions they perform.
Set up corporations.
If so required by the clients, yes.
Particularly offshore corporations.
Not limited to that.
And they manage money for their clients.
That's the basic activity of theirs.
Take money of clients and invest them, and to make decisions about how the money should be invested.
You're correct.
And they also provide accounting, tax, and legal services.
Only to their own clients.
And I take it that you, in fact, were a client of CSF in the 1970s when you maintained a residence and conducted business in the Geneva area.
You're correct, sir.
But I take it you are by no means CSF's only client.
Definitely not. Definitely.
And I think you've already testified that based on published material that you have seen about CSF, at least at certain periods of time, they have managed as much as $60 to $70 million in assets of their various clients.
Equivalent of that amount in various currencies, yes.
Now, I take it that you remained a client of CSF, but it would be fair to say that as of the period 1983 or so, you no longer kept more than a token amount of money in any Swiss bank accounts.
You're correct, sir.
Now, did there come a time after you and Mr. Secord went into business together, and I'm directing your attention now to late 1984 or early 1985, when he told you that he had been asked to help the freedom fighters in Nicaragua?
Yes, sir.
And who did he say had asked him to do that?
Effectively, the President of the United States.
If you can give us a little bit more specifically what he said.
He mentioned that the White House had approached him to see if he would be willing to assist with the Nicaraguan initiative. And since he had already an obligation to me as a partner, he did not want to give an answer without rectifying his relationship with me, and at the same time invited me to join him.
What did he say he was asked to do precisely?
He was not very specific at the beginning. I believe he himself did not know quite well the extent of the mission.
Did he shortly thereafter tell you that he was asked to procure arms for the Contras?
Yes, there was a time that he told me that he was asked to procure non-American weapons.
And did you inquire as to whether there was some profit in this?
Yes, I did.
And what did he tell you?
The answer was yes, definitely yes.
And was that profit to take the form of commissions or markup?
In the form of commission, and he made it very clear to me that it will not be the normal markup and commission that in this type of business is used. We have to operate with a much lower percentage.
Did he mention a percentage or an approximate percentage that you would, a profit that you would make on these arms?
Well, we didn't get into that type of discussion. He said that he had to see how much you could purchase the material for, what the budget was, and if the customer could afford it. He basically asked me to leave it up to him to decide what to do, which I willingly did.
You agreed to go into this business venture with him?
Yes.
And I take it you and he thereafter acquired weapons and provided them to the Contras and made a profit?
That's correct, sir.
And approximately what was the profit?
Speaking about the percentage? Or
yes, percentage, not absolute number, percentage.
The percentage from what General Secord told me, because I really didn't know what the costs were. He was handling that. He led me to believe that it would average out to something between 20 to 30%, depending on how you would look at it, whether you include the transportation or not include the transportation. But that was the approximate figure that he gave me.
And initially, were the arms acquired through a Canadian arms dealer?
Yes, sir.
And did the Canadian arms dealer share in a percentage of the commission?
The majority of it.
And did you and Mr. Secord split the remainder 50-50?
That's correct.
And did there come a later time when you ceased doing business through this Canadian arms dealer?
That's also correct.
And did you begin doing business through someone named Tom Kleins?
We effectively employed Mr. Tom Kleins to replace the Canadian arms dealer.
And did Mr. Kleins share in the commissions?
Yes, he did.
And did he get a smaller percentage than the Canadian arms dealer had gotten?
Definitely.
And did you and General Secord continue to share the remainder of the commission?
You are correct, sir.
And I take it that you, in fact, acquired arms and provided them to the Contras, taking this commission from approximately January of 1985 until approximately August of 1986.
That's correct.
Had you ever previously been involved in the purchase and sale of arms?
Effectively, the answer is no, Mr. Niels. My concentration has always been in high technology, electronics. There was a case which had to do with Winchester Olin, which I was asked to handle the account for a different person. related to the officials of the government then. So outside of that, which I consider it was not my own activity, I never dealt with weapons and arms before.
Now, did there come a time in the fall of 1985 when General Secord told you that he had been asked to do an additional kind of activity for the Contras?
Yes, he did.
And did that involve what has been referred to in these hearings as the Contra resupply operation?
That's correct, sir.
That's actually flying arms into Nicaragua and dropping them to the Contras?
That's correct.
And I take it in furtherance of that activity, airplanes were purchased, an airstrip was purchased, and arms were continued to be purchased and transported to Nicaragua.
You're correct, sir.
And I take it that this part of the business therefore acquired certain assets.
You're right.
Now, was it your understanding that there would be any profit on the Contra resupply operation?
Not beyond the purchase of material.
And by material you mean arms?
Arms, yes.
And did you understand that you had any personal financial interest in the assets of the resupply operation?
The attitude that we had that once the so-called assets were purchased, they no longer belonged to us.
Now, I understand from what you've told us in deposition testimony that you were aware of a discussion by others, including General Secord, sometime in the fall or late summer of 1986, as to whether the assets of the resupply operation should be sold to the CIA or given to the CIA.
You're correct.
But would it also be correct to say that you did not concern yourself with that issue or involve yourself in the discussion of it?
It did not fall within the territory of my activity.
Did there come a time, Mr. Hakim, when Mr. Secord told you he'd been asked to become involved in the sale of arms to Iran?
Yes.
And did he describe this as part of a broader initiative to normalize relations between the United States and Iran?
Yes, sir.
And did it also involve an effort to release the hostages held in Lebanon?
That's also correct.
Now, again, who did he say asked him to become involved in this Iranian initiative?
This time it was very specific that it was on behest of the President.
And you agreed, I take it?
Definitely.
And you and General Secord did become involved in the transportation and sale of U.S. military equipment to Iran during the year 1986?
That's correct.
Did you come to learn who General Secord was reporting to in the U.S. government in connection with the Iranian initiative?
Most of it, not all of it. I could see that he was, if you like to refer to it as reporting, he was basically coordinating with Lieutenant Colonel North, but there were times that I learned that he had meetings with Lake Director Casey and Admiral Poindexter. These are the people that I learned that he had contact with. If he had any other person that he reported to, I'm not aware of.
And in connection with the Contra activity, did you come to learn who he was principally reporting to or coordinating with in the government there?
Lieutenant Colonel North.
When did you first meet Mr. North?
It was in connection with the Iranian initiative in February of 1986 in Frankfurt.
And did you thereafter come to know Lieutenant Colonel North?
I had learned quite a bit about Colonel North through General Secord prior to meeting him, and I was very anxious to meet him, and I continued to learn more about him as we worked together.
And did you work together with him and meet with him on several occasions after February of 1986?
Generally speaking, it is correct, but it was much later, after January 86.
Now, Mr. Hakim, I want to ask you some questions about the profits or surplus generated from the sale of arms to Iran. There has already been evidence at these hearings that in February and May of 1986, U.S. TOW missiles and Hawk spare parts were sold to Iran for a price of $25 million.
Yes, sir.
And it has also been testified to that the transaction was structured in such a way that of that $25 million, $8 million went to the CIA account in Switzerland, and $17 million went to accounts under your and General Secord's control in Switzerland.
That's correct, sir.
And it's been testified to that there were some expenses that needed to be paid out of the $17 million, but that I believe General Secord's testimony was approximately $14 million remained. And my question to you is this: what were you told that $14 million, more or less, was to be used for?
My understanding was that the income from these transactions were to be used to primarily assist the Contras, and also try to make the so-called the enterprise that we had created self-sustained and create a financial backbone for it, and as well as cover the expenses and other financial requirements attached to any business activity.
So you were told that the surplus was to be used for the Contras?
As well, yes.
To pay expenses in connection with the Iranian initiative?
That's correct.
And to generate capital for the continuing Iranian initiative?
You're correct, sir.
And were you ever told anything about any other purposes for this money?
Not in the form that we had a meeting sitting down and saying that this is the allocation. The impression that I got was from the remarks that General Secord made to me that basically came from such remarks as you don't know what Ali will need next, so we have to have money available.
And I take it from time to time you learned that Ali, that's Ali North, I take it.
That's correct.
That he did have need for the money for other purposes.
That's correct. There were several occasions.
And I take it one of them involved Motorola radios for a Caribbean country?
You're correct.
And another involved a ship for a special operation in the Mediterranean?
You're correct.
And another example would be cash that was required for DEA agents in connection with an effort to release the hostages.
You're correct on that, too.
Now, we're going to get later on in your testimony to what has been referred to as the second channel. Excluding conversations relating to the second channel, were you ever told that any part of the profit or surplus from these first two sales in February and May to the government of Iran were to be for your personal benefit?
No, sir.
I take it that sometime in the summer of 1986, early summer, you did begin efforts to open up a second channel.
That's correct, sir.
And at that time, I take it there was some discussion of personal financial benefit to you.
That's right.
We will get to that later in your testimony. Would it be fair to say that you regarded yourself as being in some kind of an operation in which you, General Secord, and Oliver North each had different spheres of operation?
That was my understanding.
And North's was the political sphere?
That's correct.
And Secord's operational?
That's correct.
And yours financial?
That's correct.
And I take it in connection with both the Iranian and the Nicaraguan operation, in furtherance of your performance of your financial function, you caused certain companies to be created.
You're correct, sir.
And you also caused certain bank accounts to be set up in Switzerland.
Affirmative.
And to do this, you used your contacts with Mr. Zucker and CSF.
That's correct.
And you asked them to set up the companies and the bank accounts.
That's correct.
And I take it these companies were what we refer to as offshore companies.
As far as the United States is concerned, yes.
They were Panamanian companies?
Amongst others, yes, mostly Panamanian.
And
I believe,
African?
No,
Liberian?
Liberians, yes, yes.
And I take it these accounts were used to receive contributions that were being made by private parties and third countries for the benefit of the Contras.
As well as in the case of the Iranian initiative, the income from the sales of weapons, yes.
So the bank accounts were used to receive contributions for the Contras and the price received for the sale of arms to Iran.
You're correct, sir.
And then I take it out of these accounts were paid expenses of the Iranian operation.
That's right.
Expenses for the benefit of the Contras.
Correct.
And various other kinds of expenses.
And procurements of arms for the Contras, yes.
I take it you set up a number of accounts.
You're correct, sir.
And you caused money to be moved from one account to the other.
Well, I instructed CSF to do that.
And they followed your instructions?
They followed my instructions, yes.
And I take it that one of your purposes in doing this was to create what you referred to as confusion.
Correct. To lose the track of the movement of money.
Make it difficult for anyone else to find out how the money was moving.
Exactly.
And I take it one of the reasons that you set up bank accounts in Switzerland was to take advantage of the Swiss bank secrecy laws.
Definitely.
Now, was Oliver North's name on any of these accounts?
No, sir.
And was it on any of the companies?
No, sir.
Was Secord an authorized signatory on any of the accounts?
He definitely was not.
And was his name, to your knowledge and recollection, connected with any of the companies?
Not that I know of.
Now, at the outset, were you an authorized signatory on any of the accounts?
At one point, yes.
But at the outset, were you?
Yes.
And
at the beginning of the operation?
Yes.
No, I was not.
But there came a time when you became an authorized signatory on some of the accounts, is that correct?
That is correct.
What was the reason that you became an authorized signatory?
With all due respect, to a certain gentleman in CSF's organization, and I'm extremely thankful to CSF and Mr. Zucker for the help they gave us. But there was a gentleman there that I cannot blame him. A covert activity, I could not explain to him everything, and he did not perform to my expectation, and unlike my style, I accepted to leave my signature on so I can turn the operation around, make it more efficient.
I take it the reason that neither Mr. North nor Mr. Secord were authorized signatories on the account was that you wanted to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to connect either of them with the financial operations of the account.
Well, that was one of the objectives, and the other objective was that it was not their function as it was agreed, and besides, they did not have any track record in Switzerland to be able to operate such financial network. You have to be known to the people, you have to be trusted.
I take it, all other things being equal, you would have preferred to have left your own name off those accounts.
Without any doubt.
And you only even associated your own name with them because of this problem you had with someone at CSF.
That's correct.
I take it when, if Mr. Secord wanted money to be moved out of one of these accounts, he then had to ask you to get it done for him.
You're correct, sir.
And you would then direct CSF to move the money.
Also, that's correct.
And if Mr. North wanted money moved from out of one of those accounts, he would have to tell Mr. Secord, and Mr. Secord would have to tell you.
That's correct.
I take it there was never an occasion on which you declined to follow one of General Secord's requests.
You're correct.
And to your knowledge, General Secord followed Colonel North's requests.
As far as I know, yes.
Mr. Hakim, you have made available to the committees certain records under immunity from the various bank accounts that you caused CSF to set up to manage and handle the money from the Iranian and Nicaraguan initiatives.
That's correct, sir.
And in addition to these bank records, which account for all the money in the accounts and all the money going out of these accounts, you also made available certain accounting records of CSF.
That's correct.
And these are accounting records that are efforts to account for the movement of the money in these bank accounts you've been testifying about.
That's correct, sir.
And you have also made certain other documents available to the committees relating to these accounts.
You're correct, sir.
And indeed, prior to providing them to the committees, you organized them in 7 notebooks.
Yes, I must say it was a very difficult task to achieve this, because by design it was so structured that you could not collect the information, and my attorneys, Mr. Janis and Mr. Wexler, they went through a lot of hardship to put these things together with the assistance of accountants. It was a very difficult task to achieve.
Mr. Hakim, I'm going to ask you to turn to Exhibit 1 in the Book of Exhibits. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do, Mr. Niels.
Now, is that a document which you provided recently to the committees?
I provided the original copy, yes.
And this original, I take it, was obtained from your home in California?
That's correct.
And that was quite recently?
That's also correct.
Now, I should state for the record that a copy of this document was found in Lieutenant Colonel North's office and appears in the Tower Board report. Can you tell us what this document is?
This document shows a business structure that I started to put together to increase the efficiency of our operation once I became aware that our activities were going to continue, and I structured it in such a way that there would be 3 collecting companies. That the reason I have here 3 collecting companies, the idea was after using collecting company A, namely Lake Resources, for a certain period of time, to abandon that company and that account and move on to the next one, so we will lose trace and track of the activity. And then further below, I created the operating companies so we would be able to do proper accounting and allocation and get organized, which we never managed to do.
I take it this chart then describes, at least in a very rough way, what you envisioned as being a structure for the various companies and bank accounts that you had created.
That's correct.
And one of the reasons, again, that you had so many and that they performed different functions and that one would replace the other was that you wanted to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to trace money going in and out of these accounts.
Not only the money, but also the operation.
Now, I take it you have provided us with records from all of the companies on this chart and some additional companies.
That's correct.
And that would include bank records.
That's also correct.
And when I say our, I mean the committees, both committees, accountants for both committees, have spent considerable time analyzing the records which you have made available to us, Mr. Hakim.
Yes, sir.
And they have prepared 2 charts. One of them is exhibit number 2, and the other is exhibit number 3. And the charts are also have been blown up and are behind me in the hearing room.
I have it in front of me.
The accountants who have been doing this work, there have been a number of them. There are 2 in the hearing room today. Mr. Lou Zanardi, who is standing, and Mr. Ed Haller, who is now standing. They have divided the monies flowing in and out of the accounts that you've made available to us into 2 charts. And they have done that based on Mr. Secord's testimony.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Secord testified that at the beginning of the Nicaraguan operation, contributions were being made to Mr. Calero's bank account in Florida, and that Mr. Calero was then paying the purchase price for the arms into one of your bank accounts.
Yes, sir.
And you were then paying for those arms out of that bank account, and the difference was effectively your commission or your profit.
Yes, sir.
And during that phase, when the contributions were going to Calero, and Calero was therefore paying you, the accountants have put that phase of the transaction in the chart marked Phase 1, which is Exhibit 2 in your exhibit book.
Yes, sir.
And if Mr. Zanardi would be willing to point, you'll see that there were receipts from Calero's bank account of $11.4 million, and this would cover the period roughly December 84 to July 85. There were expenses, either in the forms of the purchase price of arms or other related expenses of $8.6 million. There is an as yet unidentified transaction, which you and the committees are endeavoring to identify at this time, and we're optimistic we will be able to, of $0.6 million.
Yes, sir.
And there is a disbursement, which I will get to later, for the benefit of partners of $0.1 million.
Yes, sir.
That is a transfer to STTGI, which I take it was 50% owned by you and Mr. Secord.
Effectively, not to STTGI, to General Secord and myself, but effectively, if you like to refer to STTGI. Yes. We didn't enter the books of STTGI.
And that leaves remaining $2.1 million, 0.7 of which was remaining in your Swiss bank accounts as of July 1985, and 1.4 million of which are shown on your records as having left those banks and as having been recorded by your accountants as distributions to capital.
Yes, sir.
And we will get to that later. That covers the money going in and out of your Swiss bank accounts during Phase 1.
Yes, sir.
Now I'd like you to turn to Exhibit 3, which is also blown up on the wall behind me. And that is a chart showing the money moving in and out of your Swiss bank accounts during Phase 2.
Yes, sir.
That covers, according to General Secord's testimony, a time when Oliver North had decided that the contributions should no longer be given to Calero, but should be placed in your bank accounts.
Yes, sir.
Arms were continued to be purchased and supplied to the Contras, but instead of the purchase price coming from Calero, it was paid for out of contributions that were put directly into your bank accounts.
That's correct.
It also includes receipts from the sale of arms to Iran.
Yes, sir.
And I should say for the record, well, let me stop and begin over. You'll see that the total receipts during Phase 2 are $35.6 million.
Yes, sir.
That covers $0.7 million, which was left in the bank at the end of Phase 1.
Yes, sir.
$1.8 million received from private donors. $2 million received from third countries, and those the private donors in third countries were contributions for the benefit of the Contras, and $31.1 million received for the sale of arms to Iran.
Yes, sir.
I should mention that that $31.1 million figure includes a $1 million deposit in November of 1985, which General Secord testified constituted an advance for transportation costs.
This is the Israeli payment?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Then you'll see there were disbursements directly out of the accounts in the amount of $26 million.
Yes, sir.
7.9 you and the committee and General Secord have identified as disbursements for the benefit of the Contras. $14.4 million you and General Secord and the committees have identified as disbursements in connection with the Iranian arms initiative. That includes both the purchase price of arms and the cost of transportation and other incidental expenses. Point 9 have been identified by you and General Secord and the committees as expenses for miscellaneous projects at the request of Lieutenant Colonel North, and I think you've already testified about them here today.
Yes, sir.
$0.6 million have been identified as disbursements for the benefit of the partners, and that would include money transferred to STTGI and money transferred to STC, which is Stanford Technology in California.
Yes, sir.
And I take it Stanford Technology in California is a corporation that you are the sole owner of.
That is correct.
The total amount of money going to STTGI during Phase 1 and Phase 2 is just over $500,000. And since there's been testimony about this previously, I'm going to ask you now, Hakeem, were those loans to STTGI or infusions of capital into STTGI?
It started out to be a loan, but for bookkeeping purposes, at this time, I would categorize it as infusion of money into STTGI for the services rendered at a time to the enterprise, if you will, and its other activities, and the reflection of the income to STTGI can be seen in our books in STTGI, how it was dispersed and spent. But effectively, for the purpose of these hearings, I do not refer to them as loan.
You do not refer to them as loans?
No, sir.
I take it there was a time